waters, carrying a secret that could change the world. A time capsule waiting to be opened. Days after the crash, nothing remained. Until sonar found it again.
The radio crackled once, then died forever. Captain Elias Thorne didn't flinch. He simply reached over, flipped the master switch off with the same deliberate calm he used to light his last cigarette before every dawn patrol. The silence that followed felt heavier than the flak jackets they no longer wore. Outside the cockpit glass, Lake Mead stretched silver and endless under a merciless July sun, the kind of glare that made you doubt your own eyes. 33,000 feet below, the water looked solid enough to land on. Elias knew better. Still reading the same, he asked without turning his head. Lieutenant Daniel Voss, strapped into the co-pilot's seat, tapped the altimeter twice habit from too many nights when needles lied. 400 and holding. But the lake's coming up too fast, Skipper. We're not supposed to be this low yet. Elias felt the familiar knot tighten between his shoulder blades. They had been airborne since 0430, climbing in smooth stages while Dr. Harlan Whitlock and his team in the rear cabin ran their final checks on the sun tracker. The device half gyroscope, half dreaming machine was supposed to stare straight into the sun and tell a missile exactly where it was, no matter how thick the smoke, how black the night, how broken the pilot. No more boys guessing their way home through cloud and cordite. No more empty chairs at supper tables because someone misread a horizon. Elias had buried enough friends to believe in miracles made of brass and quartz. He still believed. He just didn't trust miracles to arrive on schedule. Behind them, the bomb bay doors had been welded shut years ago. The guns were long gone. Serial number 4521,792 had rolled off the assembly line in late 45, missed the war by weeks, and spent the last 3 years as a high-altitude guinea pig. Today's flight was meant to be the last proof run before the Air Force handed the sun tracker over to the missile boys at White Sands. One clean data pass over the lake at low level, one set of distorted solar readings to compare against the high-altitude numbers, then home to March Field for beer and paperwork. Elias had promised his daughter Maggie he'd be back before her birthday candles were lit. Tomorrow night. She was turning 8. He carried her latest drawing folded inside his flight suit, a stick-figure pilot standing on a cloud, waving at a sun with a smiling face. The sun tracker was supposed to make sure men like him could keep promises like that. "Harlan," Elias called over the intercom. Voice steady. "How much longer do you need at this altitude?" Static hissed. Then Whitlock's voice came through, clipped and excited. 90 seconds, Captain. The tracker's locked. We're getting crystal clear azimuth. Just hold her wings level." Elias nodded to himself. 90 seconds. He could give them 90 seconds. He eased the yoke forward a hair, letting the big bomber settle into a gentle descent. The 4 Wright R3-350s purred in perfect sync. "You sound so familiar," it felt like breathing. Daniel kept one hand on the throttles, the other brushing the photo taped above the panel his wife Ruth and their newborn son, taken 3 weeks before Daniel shipped out for the last raids over Kyushu. Neither man spoke of the pictures. They didn't have to. The lake kept rising, too fast. "Altimeter steady," Daniel said again, but the words sounded thinner now. Elias glanced at the vertical speed indicator. -500 feet per minute. Acceptable. Then -700. Then 8. The airspeed crept up. He felt the first real prickle of unease crawl across his scalp. "Harlan," he said, sharper this time. "We're getting sync here. Wrap it up. 30 seconds, came the reply. "The sun's refraction is perfect, exactly what we needed." 30 seconds became 20. Elias trimmed the elevators, fighting the sudden heaviness in the controls. The B-29 was never meant to dance this close to water at 200 knots. He could see individual wavelets now, tiny ridges of light and shadow that should not have been visible from 5,000 feet. The horizon line had flattened into a razor edge. No depth, no warning. Daniel throttles up 20%. The engines answered instantly, a deep, comforting roar. But the sink rate didn't budge. "Harlan," Elias barked. "We're going through the goddamn lake if you don't." The words never finished. A low metallic moan rolled through the airframe, like a ship striking a reef in slow U-motion. The starboard wing dipped hard. Elias hauled the yoke left, boots dancing on the rudders. Something had grabbed their mirage. Downdraft, optical libut. The airplane believed it was water and tried to swim. The first engine caught the surface with a sound like canvas ripping. Propeller blades folded like paper. Shearing metal screamed, and the whole airframe bucked upward as if kicked by God himself. Alarms howled. The cockpit filled with the sharp stink of hot oil and shredded rubber. Elias felt the yoke wrench itself sideways. He fought it back with both arms, shoulders burning.
Rafts,
Daniel shouted, already reaching for the overhead panel. Everybody now! In the rear, Whitlock's voice cut through the chaos, high and disbelieving. The trackers still running, still shut it down. Elias roared. Brace! The bomber skipped once, impossibly, grotesquely metal belly slapping water at killing speed. The impact slammed Elias's teeth together. Instruments shattered. The nose dropped. The second skip was shorter, harder. Water exploded through the Astrodome in a white geyser, drenching the panel, shorting circuits, killing lights. Then the airplane flew again for one last desperate heartbeat, wings level, nose high, engines screaming on 3 remaining props. Elias saw the far shore flicker past, a thin dark line of rock and scrub. Too far. The B-29 mushed back down, slower this time, almost gentle. The hull dug in, spun once, then settled like a tired animal. Water. You rushed through every torn seam. Cold, fast. Elias unbuckled first. Out now. Daniel was already moving, dragging the life raft lanyard. Behind them, the crew stumbled forward, Whitlock clutching soaked notebooks, Tech Sergeant Owen Calder limping from a twisted knee, Corporal Leo Marquez hauling the emergency radio case like it was his child. No panic, no screaming, just the practiced rhythm of men who had rehearsed this nightmare in briefings and in nightmares. They hit the water together, 5 figures in yellow May Wests, kicking away from the sinking giant. The bomber tilted onto its left wing, engines still turning, props thrashing foam. One by one the engines drowned and went silent. The tail rose, then slipped under. A final bubble of air broke the surface, then nothing. The lake smoothed over, as though it had never been disturbed. Elias treaded water, staring at the empty spot. His chest burned not from cold, not from effort, but from the sudden, brutal understanding that he might not make Maggie's birthday after all. He thought of her drawing, the smiling sun, the waving pilot. He thought of the sun tracker, locked now in 40 feet of silt and darkness, still pointed at the sky it would never see again. Daniel swam up beside him, coughing. We're alive, Skipper. Elias looked at his co-pilot, saw the same stunned relief mirrored back. Yeah, he said quietly. We are. They floated there, 5 men in the middle of a lake that had almost claimed them, listening. To the soft lap of water against their life vests, the sun kept burning. The war was long over, but the cost of reaching for tomorrow had just been paid in full. And somewhere beneath them, the old superfortress waited silent, intact, a steel coffin full of hope that had come too close to the edge. The 5 of them drifted in a loose circle, yellow vests bright against the blue, the only color left in a world that had suddenly turned monochrome. Elias kept his eyes on the spot where the bomber had disappeared, as if staring hard enough might force it back up. The water was warmer than he expected, summer heat trapped in the shallows, but it still stole breath from his lungs in short, sharp bursts. No one spoke for what felt like minutes. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of everything they weren't saying. Daniel broke it first, voice hoarse from Swallowed Lake. Maggie's birthday tomorrow. Elias felt the words land like a punch he'd been waiting for. He nodded once, slow. She wants the red cake again, the one with the extra frosting roses. He could see it. Maggie in her Sunday dress, standing on a kitchen chair to blow out candles, flour on her nose because she'd insisted on helping. He'd promised to bring her a piece of Skya postcard from the flight, maybe, or one of those little metal data plates the engineers sometimes let him keep. Now the only thing he might bring home was himself, if the current didn't decide otherwise. Owen Calder treaded water awkwardly, one leg, dragging. The knee he'd twisted on impact throbbed in time with his heartbeat. He was the youngest, barely 23, still wore his dog tags tucked under his shirt like they might protect him from peacetime accidents. My ma's gonna kill me, he muttered. She already hates flying, said the war should have been enough. He tried to laugh. It came out wet. Leo Marquez floated on his back, arms spread, staring straight up at the sun. He'd been the one to rig the emergency beacon before they ditched old habit from Pacific bailouts. The case bobbed beside him now, orange and useless until someone found the frequency. She'll forgive you when she sees you're still breathing, Leo said quietly. Trust me. Mother's got a long memory for miracles. Harlan Whitlock said nothing. He clutched the sodden notebook to his chest like a life preserver. Pages bled ink in slow black veins down his flight suit. Every few seconds he lifted it higher, as though keeping it dry would somehow undo what had happened. The sun tracker had been his life's work. 6 years of sleepless nights, grant rejections, arguments with generals who wanted bombs, not dreams. He told Elias once, over bad coffee in the March Field Mess Hall, that if the device worked, it would mean no more boys dying because a navigator fell asleep or a cloud hit a mountain. Elias had believed him then. He still did. But belief didn't bring airplanes back from the bottom of a lake. A light chop started up, small waves slapping against their vests. The sun climbed higher, turning the water into a sheet of hammered silver. Elias felt the first real burn across his shoulders. No shade, no cover, just heat and reflection, and the slow realization that rescue might take hours, maybe longer. They'd filed a flight plan, sure, but the last position report had been routine. No mayday. No one knew they were swimming instead of flying. Daniel swam closer to Elias. "You okay, Skipper?" Elias looked at him, really looked. Daniel's face was pale under the tan, lips blue at the edges. The photo of Ruth and the baby was still taped inside the cockpit, probably floating somewhere down there with the rest of their lives. "I'm here," Elias said. It was the only honest answer he had. They formed up instinctively, backs to the center, facing outward like they'd done in life rafts after Tokyo raids. Old muscle memory. Owen started humming something low, an old hymn his grandmother used to sing. No one told him to stop. The sound carried across the water, thin but steady. Harlan finally spoke. "The data," his voice cracked. Most of it was transmitting right up until the first hit. "If the telemetry boys at the base caught the burst, they'll know something happened." Elias finished for him. "They'll come looking." Harlan nodded, but his eyes stayed on the notebook. "It was working. Perfect lock. I saw the trace before the glass broke. Azimuth, elevation, refraction curve, all of it. We had it." Leo turned his head. "They wasn't for nothing." Harlan looked at him like the words were in a foreign language. "The airplane's gone. The tracker's gone. 3 years of calibration runs gone." Owen stopped humming. "We're not gone." The words hung there. Simple, brutal, true. Elias felt something loosen in his chest, not relief. Not yet, but the first thin thread of it. He thought of Maggie again, of the way she'd run to the porch every time she heard an airplane engine, convinced it was him coming home early. He thought of the promise he'd made her mother the night before he left for basic training. "I'll always find my way back." Stupid words then. Necessary words now. He reached out, put a hand on Harlan's shoulder. The scientist flinched, then steadied. "You built something that could see the sun through smoke and lies," Elias said. "That's still true. Even if it's sitting on the bottom right now, someone else will pick it up. They always do." Harlan swallowed hard. "I wanted to be there when it flew on a missile, when it proved itself." "You will be," Daniel said. "In the room when they unpack the reports, in the history books, in the letters we write home tonight." A distant throb rolled across the waterlow, mechanical, growing. Elias turned toward it. A speck on the horizon. Not a boat yet. Maybe a search plane. Maybe just heat shimmer, Owen pointed. "That's an engine. R3-350 sound. One of ours." They all listened. The throb became a drone, became a shape, a PBY Catalina, low and slow, banking. Toward the lake. Someone had noticed the missing check-in. Someone had cared enough to look. Elias felt the knot in his throat tighten again, different this time. Not fear. Gratitude so sharp it hurt. The Catalina circled once, twice. A flare arced high, red smoke brooming against the sky. Then the big flying boat settled onto the water, engines idling, a boat hook already extended. They swam toward it together, 5 men who had just watched tomorrow drown and still refused to let go of today. As the rescue swimmer reached them, Elias looked back one last time at the empty patch of lake. Somewhere under there, the old B-29 lay quiet, wings folded like a sleeping bird, carrying a piece of the future it had almost delivered. He turned away and let the strong hands pull him toward the hull. They weren't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The Catalina's hull felt impossibly solid under Elias's hands. Rough aluminum, warm from the sun, slick with lake water and rescue spray. The swimmer, a young airman with a sunburned neck and steady eyes, hooked an arm under Elias's vest and hauled him up the short ladder like he weighed nothing. Elias's legs buckled the moment his boots touched the deck, not from weakness, from the sudden absence of fight. He dropped to one knee, palm flat against the metal, feeling the faint vibration of idling engines travel up through his bones. One by one, the others came aboard. Daniel first, coughing lake out of his lungs but already scanning faces for you. Familiar ones. Owen next, wincing as his bad knee folded under him. The swimmer caught him before he hit hard. Leo handed up the beacon case like it was evidence in a trial, then pulled himself over the gunwale with the last of his strength. Harlan was last. He refused to let go of the notebook until the airman gently pried his fingers loose and set it on the deck beside him. Ink had run in dark rivers across every page, but Harlan stared at it like it might still speak. The Catalina lifted off again almost immediately, water streaming from the hull in silver sheets. Elias stayed on his knees a moment longer, watching the lake fall away beneath them. From up here, the surface looked innocent again, flat, blue, unmarked. No scar where 40 tons of aluminum had punched through. No trace of the machine that had carried them into tomorrow, and then tried to keep them there forever. Inside the cramped cabin, a corpsman wrapped blankets around their shoulders, pressed canteens into their hands. Someone lit a cigarette and passed it without asking. Elias took a drag, coughed, passed it to Daniel. The smoke tasted like ash and survival. The pilot, a major with salt and pepper hair, and the calm of a man who'd fished too many crews out of too many places, leaned back from the cockpit door. Marchfield's got a bird warming up for you boys. Doc's waiting. Debrief can wait till you're dry. Elias nodded. Appreciate the pickup. The major studied him for a beat. We picked up your last. Transmission burst. Telemetry cut off mid-sentence. When you didn't check in, we figured the worst. Glad we were wrong. Harlan lifted his head at that. The burst. You caught it. Most of it, the major said. Enough to know the sun tracker was singing before the music stopped. White Sands already has a team pulling the raw data off the tapes. They're calling it a partial success. Harlan's shoulders sagged, not defeat, but something close to absolution. He looked at Elias. Partial, he whispered. Elias met his eyes. Better than zero. The flight back took 40 minutes. Long enough for shock to settle into a dull, bone-deep ache. Long enough for memories to start replaying in the quiet spaces between engine noise. Elias thought of the moment the wing dipped, the way the yoke had fought him like it had its own mind. He thought of Maggie's drawing again, folded now inside a sodden pocket, probably ruined. He thought of the promise he'd almost broken. Daniel sat beside him, blanket pulled tight. Ruth's gonna want the whole story, he said. Every detail. She'll make me tell it 10 times before she believes I'm really home. Elias managed a half smile. Tell her the part where you kept the throttle steady. That's the part worth hearing twice. Owen leaned forward, voice low. I keep seeing the nose drop. Thought that was it. Then we skipped, like the lake spit us back out. Leo nodded slowly. Old 792 always did have a mean, stubborn streak. Guess she figured we weren't done. Yet. Harlan said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, it was almost too quiet to hear over the props. I keep thinking about the last reading. The refraction curve was textbook. Perfect. If we'd had 30 more seconds. Elias turned to him. You got what you needed. The rest is just hardware. Harlan looked down at his hands, wrinkled, trembling, still stained with ink. It was more than hardware. I know, Elias said, but hardware can be replaced. Crews can't. The major's voice came over the intercom again. We've got visual on March. Towers cleared us straight in. Medics will meet you on the ramp. Elias felt the airplane bank gently, wings tipping toward home. Through the small porthole he could see the runways laid out like crossed ribbons, the control tower standing sentinel, the familiar sprawl of hangars and fuel trucks. Ordinary. Precious. They touched down softer than he expected. Tires chirped once, then rolled. The Catalina taxied to a stop near the operations building. A knot of people waited, medics with stretchers, officers with clipboards, a few wives and girlfriends who'd heard the radio chatter and driven straight from town. Maggie's mother was there. Elias saw her the second the door opened, standing apart from the crowd, arms folded tight across her chest, face pale under the wide brim of her hat. She didn't run. She waited. But when he stepped onto the tarmac, legs unsteady, she crossed the distance in 6 quick strides and wrapped her arms. Around him so hard he felt his ribs creak. He buried his face in her hair. It smelled of soap and the lavender she kept in the kitchen window. I'm here, he whispered. I'm here. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were red, furious, terrified, relieved all at once. You promised. I know, don't do that again. He nodded. Couldn't speak. Behind them, the others were being helped down. Daniel's wife Ruth was already there, baby on her hip, reaching for him with her free hand. Owen's mother stood off to one side, handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Leo's kid sister 17 and fear sponged his shoulder before hugging him. Harlan stood alone for a moment until an older man in civilian clothes, probably someone from the project office, walked up and shook his hand without a word. Elias let his wife lead him toward the waiting ambulance. He glanced back once at the lake direction, even though it was miles away and invisible. Somewhere under that water lay a steel time capsule, engines cold, sun tracker still pointed upward like it was waiting for clearance to climb again. He thought of the men who'd built her, the boys who'd flown her in combat colors, the scientists who'd dreamed her new purpose. He thought of the 5 of them who'd almost become part of her story instead of telling it. They loaded him into the back of the ambulance. His wife climbed in beside him, never letting go of his hand. The doors closed. The sirens stayed silent. They weren't dying. Today, as the vehicle pulled away, Elias closed his eyes and listened to the heartbeat beside him. Steady, alive, home. Tomorrow Maggie would turn 8. He'd be there to watch her blow out the candles. And when she asked why his hands shook when he hugged her, he'd tell her the truth. Sometimes the sky tries to keep you, but the people who love you pull harder. He'd leave out the part about the lake. Some stories were better kept underwater, at least for a little while longer. The hospital room at March Field smelled of antiseptic and fresh coffee someone had smuggled in. Elias lay on the bed with the thin blanket pulled to his chest, staring at the ceiling tiles. One of them had a water stain shaped like a lopsided heart. He kept tracing its edges with his eyes, trying to make it look like something else. Anything else. A soft knock. The door opened before he answered. Maggie slipped in first, barefoot, clutching a small paper bag crinkled at the edges. Her mother followed, holding the door wide so the hallway light spilled across the floor. The girl stopped at the foot of the bed, eyes huge, taking in the 4th line taped to her father's arm, the bruise blooming purple across his cheekbone, the way the sheets tented awkwardly over his bandaged ribs. "You're not flying today?" she asked. Her voice was small but steady, the same tone she used when asking if monsters were real. Elias pushed himself up on one elbow, ignoring the pull in his side. "Not today, Peanut. Doctor says you have to stay put for a bit." Maggie climbed onto the edge of the mattress without asking permission. She set the bag carefully between them like it was made of glass. "I brought cake." "The red one. Mom said we could have it here instead." Her mother Sarah stepped closer, eyes shining but dry. She'd cried herself empty on the drive over now. She just looked tired in the way only love can make you tired. "The nurses said it's okay. As long as you don't eat the frosting, Roses. They're watching." Elias reached for the bag, fingers brushing Maggie's. Inside was a lopsided slice wrapped in wax paper, crimson frosting smeared across the top like a child's painting of sunset. One rose had already been picked off, evidence of earlier sampling. He broke off a piece and held it out. "First bite's yours. Birthday rules." Maggie shook her head. "You first. You almost didn't come." The words landed soft but square. Elias felt them settle somewhere deep, next to the ache in his ribs. He ate the bite anyway, tasting sugar and food coloring and something sharper underneath. Forgiveness, maybe, or just the plain fact of being alive to taste it. Sarah sat on the other side of the bed. She took his free hand, thumb tracing the knuckles he'd split on the yolk. "They're saying the plane's in 40 feet of water, mostly intact. They're talking about raising it someday. For the museum. For history." Elias nodded slowly. He'd heard the same from the major who'd come by earlier. Brief, clipped update. Between x-rays. The B-29 had settled gently on her belly, wings level, nose pointed roughly west toward California. The sun tracker, still bolted in the Astrodome, had kept its lenses open until the silt covered them. Telemetry had captured almost everything until the final plunge. White Sands called it invaluable. The brass called it a write-off with benefits. Maggie listened to the grown-up words without interrupting. When they paused, she asked, "Did it hurt when it hit the water?" Elias looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't asking for the heroic version. She wanted the truth a child could hold without breaking. "It hurt," he said, "like getting kicked by a horse you thought was your friend. But then we all got out. Together. That part didn't hurt at all." She considered that. Like when Tommy fell off his bike and his friends carried him home. Exactly like that. Maggie reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper newer than the one that had drowned in his flight suit. She smoothed it against the blanket. Another drawing, 5 stick figures in yellow vests floating on blue scribbles. Above them, a big sun with rays that looked like arms reaching down. In the corner, a tiny airplane shape, half sunk, half smiling. "This is you and your friends," she said, pointing. "And the sun is watching so you don't get lost again." Elias felt the room tilt, not from pain meds, but from something warmer. He traced the stick figures with his finger. "You got the colors right. Yellow vests, blue water. I used the good crayons," she said solemnly. Sarah wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand. "She drew it while we waited for news. Wouldn't go to bed until she finished." Elias pulled Maggie closer, careful of the fourth. She tucked herself against his side, head on his shoulder. For a minute no one spoke. The only sounds were the distant beep of monitors, the murmur of nurses in the hall, the soft rustle of wax paper, as Maggie broke off another piece of cake. Later, after Sarah took Maggie to the cafeteria for milkshakes, Elias lay alone again. The heart-shaped stain on the ceiling had shifted and the afternoon light looked more like wings now. He thought of the bomber down there. Engines quiet, waiting. He thought of Harlan in the next room over, probably still clutching salvaged pages, rewriting equations in his head. He thought of Daniel calling Ruth from the payphone down the corridor, voice cracking when he said the baby's name. He thought of Owen and Leo trading bad jokes with the corpsman, pretending the shakes were from cold instead of memory. He thought of the promise he'd kept, not perfectly, not without cost, but kept. A knock. The door opened again. Daniel leaned in the frame, still in hospital issue pajamas, hair damp from a shower. "They're springing us tomorrow morning. Thought you might want company for the last night." Elias gestured to the empty chair. "Cake's almost gone. Maggie left you the last rose. Daniel, you." Crossed the room, eased into the seat. "She's got good taste." They sat in the quiet that only old friends can share without filling it. After a while, Daniel said, "I keep thinking about the skip. The way she bounced twice before she gave up, like she was trying to decide." Elias nodded. "She decided right." "Yeah." Another stretch of silence. Then Daniel, "You gonna fly again?" Elias looked toward the window. Beyond the blinds, the desert sky was turning the color of rose frosting. "Test hops, maybe. Nothing combat. Nothing that takes me away overnight." Daniel exhaled. "Good. Ruth would kill me if I went back up without you there to yell at me." Elias almost laughed. "Almost. Tell her I'll be the one yelling." They talked until the nurse came with evening meds, low voices. Small stories. The kind that don't make headlines but keep men breathing. When Daniel left, he paused at the door. "Happy early birthday to the kid," he said. Elias smiled for real this time. "Tell your boy the same when he turns 1. The door clicked shut. Elias reached for the drawing Maggie had left on the bedside table. He unfolded it again, studied the 5 yellow figures, the watchful sun, the half-sunk airplane with its little smile. He set it carefully beside the water glass, where the light would catch it all night. Tomorrow he'd go home. Tomorrow he'd hug his daughter without machines between them. Tomorrow the lake would still be there, the bomber still sleeping, the sun tracker still dreaming. View of skies it would never see. But tonight was enough. He closed his eyes and let the hospital sounds fade. Somewhere far below the surface of things, a steel heart kept time with his own, steady, stubborn, still beating. The morning discharge papers came at 0700 sharp, crisp as new flight orders. Elias signed them with a pen that trembled only once when the nurse asked if he needed help steadying his hand. He shook his head, finished the flourish on his last name, and handed them back without meeting her eyes. Weakness was temporary. Shame was permanent. Sarah waited in the hallway with Maggie already buckled into the back seat of the old Ford. The girl had insisted on wearing her red party dress again, even though the cake was long gone and the frosting roses reduced to sticky fingerprints on the hospital pillow. She waved through the window like Elias had just returned from a routine milk run instead of a near drowning. He walked out slower than he wanted to admit. Each step pulled at the tape holding his ribs together, but he kept his shoulders square. Daniel was already there, leaning against the fender in civilian slacks and a borrowed sweater that didn't quite fit. Ruth stood beside him, baby balanced on her hip, the little one gnawing on a teething ring like it owed him money. "You look like hell," Daniel said by way of greeting. "You should see the other guy," Elias replied. "He's sitting in 40 feet of silt." They both laughed short, sharp, the kind that you hurts the ribs but feels necessary. Ruth stepped forward and kissed Elias on the cheek without warning. "Thank you," she whispered. For bringing him back, Elias swallowed. He brought himself. I just yelled a lot. Owen and Leo appeared from around the corner of the building, still in hospital blues because no one had thought to bring them spare clothes. Owen's knee was wrapped in fresh elastic. Leo carried a small duffel that probably held everything he owned in the world. Harlan trailed behind them, briefcase in one hand, salvaged notebook in the other. The pages had dried stiff and curled, ink faded to ghosts, but he held it like scripture. They gathered in the parking lot like men who'd forgotten how to stand apart. No one spoke of the lake directly, not yet. Instead, they traded small things. Owen's mother had sent cookies that tasted like home. Leo's sister had mailed a new pair of socks because you always lose one when things go wrong. Harlan had received a telegram from White Sands promising a full review of the telemetry burst, promising preliminary results. Sarah watched them from the car, arms folded, letting the moment breathe. Maggie pressed her face to the glass, counting heads. 5! Still 5. Daniel broke the quiet first. We should go see her. No one asked who. They all knew. The drive to the lake took 3 hours. They went in 2 cars, Sarah's Ford leading, Daniel's borrowed Chevy following. No one suggested otherwise. The desert rolled past in shades, of tan and rust, the same indifferent landscape that had watched them fall and rise again. Maggie sang nursery rhymes until she fell asleep against the window, cheeks smudged with red crayon. They stopped at a roadside diner halfway. Coffee black as oil, eggs over easy, toast nobody really ate. Harlan spread the ruined notebook on the table, pages crackling. He traced faded lines with a finger. The last clean reading, he said, voice low so Maggie wouldn't wake. Look at the curve here. Textbook solar acquisition. If the missile boys can replicate even half of this. Owen leaned in. They will. You gave them the map. Leo sipped his coffee. And we gave them the cost. No one argued. They reached the lake just after noon. The water level had dropped another foot since the accident, drought carving new scars into the shoreline. A small wooden sign had been hammered into the dirt near the access road. Restricted area recovery operations in progress. A lone Air Force pickup sat parked under a tarp awning, 2 airmen drinking cokes and watching the horizon. Elias parked. They got out slowly, like men stepping onto unfamiliar ground. The sun hammered down, turning the water into a sheet of hammered tin. No wind, no waves, just heat and light and memory. One of the airmen walked over Young, respectful hat under his arm. Captain Thorne? Elias nodded. Major sent word you might come, said to give you the courtesy. He gestured toward a small boat tied to a makeshift dock. We can. You out. Take you out. Not too close safety regs, but close enough to see. They didn't hesitate. The boat was aluminum, flat-bottomed, powered by an outboard that coughed like an old smoker. The airman drove. Elias sat in the bow, Sarah beside him, Maggie between them clutching the gunwale. The others crowded the stern, quiet. They motored out slowly. 50 yards from shore, the water deepened to green-black. The airman cut the engine. They drifted. There, he said, pointing. Buoy markers, red and white, that's her position. 2 small floats bobbed on the surface, connected by yellow line. Beneath them, 40 feet down, lay the B-29. Invisible but present, a shape in the dark. Engine silent, wings level. Sun tracker still aimed at a sky it could no longer reach. Maggie leaned over the side, staring hard. Can she see us? Elias followed her gaze. Maybe, in her way. Sarah put an arm around Maggie's shoulders. She's resting, like when you take a nap after a long day. Maggie nodded solemnly. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded paper airplane, red crayon stripes, one wing slightly bent. She held it out over the water. For luck, she said, so you find your way home someday. She let go. The paper plane caught a breath of hot air, circled once, then settled onto the surface. It floated there, bright against the dark water, a tiny red promise. No one spoke. The boat rocked gently. The sun kept burning. Somewhere below, the old bomber waited patient. You, stubborn, a steel heart still beating with the dreams men had poured into her. After a long minute, Elias touched the airman's shoulder. That's enough. They motored back. When the keel scraped sand, they stepped onto dry land like men returning from another country. Harlan folded his notebook one last time and tucked it under his arm. Owen limped but didn't complain. Leo helped Ruth carry the baby. Daniel walked beside Elias, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Maggie ran ahead to the car, then turned back. Daddy? Yeah, Peanut. Are we coming back? Elias looked at the lake one more time. The paper airplane had drifted closer to shore, still afloat. Someday. he said. When they bring her up, we'll be here. Maggie smiled, the same smile she'd worn when she blew out her candles. Good. I want to see if she still has her smile. They drove home into the afternoon light, desert stretching endless behind them. The lake shrank in the rearview mirror until it was just a blue memory, holding its secrets close. But the secrets weren't gone. They were waiting, patient, for the day the water gave her back. And when that day came, 5 men and 1 little girl would be standing on the shore, older, maybe wiser, definitely still together, ready to welcome an old friend home. The years slipped away like water through open fingers. By 1955, the drought had bitten deeper into the Colorado River basin. Lake Mead shrank year by year, exposing old shorelines, cracked mud flats, drowned canyons that hadn't seen daylight since the Hoover Dam first backed up the river. The newspapers called it progress. Elias called it patience. He and Sarah had moved twice, once to a quieter street in Pasadena, once to a house with a bigger yard so Maggie could keep the swing set she'd outgrown but refused to let go. Maggie was 15 now, all legs and opinions, hair the same dark chestnut as her mother's but worn long and straight like the girls in the magazines. She still drew airplanes, though the stick figures had given way to careful 3-view sketches copied from library books. She wanted to fly helicopters someday, she said. Not fighters, something that could hover, wait, rescue. Elias never argued. He just bought her model kits and listened when she talked about rotor blades and cyclic controls. Daniel and Ruth had stayed close, same neighborhood, same church pew 3 rows back. Their boy was walking now, then running, then tall enough to reach the throttle in his father's old Chevy without standing on tiptoe. Owen married a nurse from the Marchfield Hospital. They had twin girls, who called Elias Uncle Skip, and demanded stories about the day the sky tried to eat him. Leo drifted for a while, odd jobs in Nevada, then California, but he always came back for Thanksgiving, bringing bad cigars and worse jokes. Harlan Whitlock never married. He stayed with the project longer than most thought possible, watching the sun tracker evolve into inertial guidance systems, then stellar inertial hybrids, then the first true star shots for ICBM. He published papers with footnotes that quietly credited flight data acquired under adverse conditions. The 14th of July, 1948. He kept the ruined notebook on his desk until the pages turned brittle as autumn leaves. When he retired in 1962, he sent Elias a single photograph, the final clean trace from that last burst, framed in simple black. On the back he'd written in careful block letters, "We got there. Thank you." Elias kept the photo in the top drawer of his desk, next to Maggie's first paper airplane drawing. The call came in the summer of 1983. A voice Elias hadn't heard in 35 years, older, rougher, but still unmistakably the major who'd flown the Catalina that day. The Air Force, in cooperation with the National Park Service and a university dive team, had finally secured funding to survey and document the B-29 before the lake level dropped any further. They weren't raising her, not yet, maybe never, but they were going down with cameras, lights, remotely operated vehicles. They wanted the original crew there when the first clear images came up on the monitor. Elias said yes before the major finished the sentence. They gathered again at the lake on a September morning that felt like July, hot, still, merciless. The water had retreated so far the old buoy markers sat high and dry on cracked mud. Temporary operations tent had been set up near the new shoreline. Inside, folding tables, coffee urns, banks of black and white monitors, engineers in polo shirts arguing about umbilical lengths. The 5 men walked in together. Grey hair, careful steps, but the same loose circle they'd formed in yellow vests 35 years earlier. Maggie, 23, working on her commercial pilot's license, stood beside her father, arms folded, watching everything with the same focused stare she used in the cockpit simulator. A young project lead barely older than Maggie approached them with a mix of awe and nerves. "We've got the ROV positioned over the cockpit section. First live feed in about 5 minutes. We thought you might want to see her first." They filed into the darkened tent. The main monitor glowed pale blue. Static flickered, then cleared. There she was. The B-29 lay on her belly in 45 feet of water that looked black until the lights hit it. Wings level, nose still pointed west. The fuselage was covered in a soft grey silk blanket, but the shape was unmistakable superfortress lines softened by time and sediment, yet whole. The starboard outboard engine pod had torn away completely. The other 3 props stood frozen mid-twist, blades bent like broken fingers. The Astrodome was clouded but intact. Somewhere behind that clouded glass, the sun tracker still waited, lenses aimed at a sun that had moved on without it. No one spoke for a long minute. The only sound was the hum of cooling fans and the soft tick of a keyboard. Owen broke the silence. "She looks tired." Nodded, but not broken. Harlan stepped closer to the screen, hands clasped behind his back like he was afraid to touch it. The dome's still clear enough. If the seals held, he trailed off. Everyone knew what he meant. The tracker might still be functional, a museum piece, a miracle preserved. Daniel looked at Elias. "You okay, Skipper?" Elias didn't answer right away. He studied the image, the familiar curve of the nose, the faded ghost of the serial number on the tail, the way the silt had drifted against the leading edges like snow against a fence. "I promised her I'd come back," he said quietly. Maggie slipped her hand into his. Her fingers were strong, calloused from stick time. "You did," she whispered. "You brought all of us." The project lead cleared his throat. "We can pan to the Astrodome if you'd like. Get a closer look at the tracker." Elias shook his head. "No, let her rest. We've seen enough." They stepped outside into the heat. The lake stretched away, smaller than any of them remembered, but still vast enough to hold a secret for another generation. The paper airplane Maggie had released all those years ago was long gone, of course dissolved, drifted, sunk, but Elias liked to think some fragment of red crayon still floated somewhere, stubborn as the men who'd flown that day. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the water shimmer. No speeches, no tears. Just 5 old friends and 1 young woman who'd grown up in the shadow of their story, breathing the same hot air, feeling the same quiet pulse of something finished and something still waiting. Later, when the others had drifted toward the coffee and the air-conditioned tent, Elias walked to the water's edge alone. He crouched, picked up a small flat stone, skipped it across the surface. It bounced 4 times before it sank. He straightened, dusted his hands, and looked back at the group. Maggie caught his eye and smiled the same smile she'd worn at 8, blowing out candles, certain her father would always come home. He walked back to them. The bomber would stay where she was for now, maybe forever. A steel time capsule sealed by water and time, carrying the dreams of men who dared to look beyond the war they'd survived. And somewhere in that quiet dark, the sun tracker kept watch, silent, patient, still pointed at tomorrow. If the story of these men, their unbreakable bond, and the quiet courage it took to keep looking forward moved you, please hit that subscribe button on Red Maps WW2. We'll keep bringing you the human heart of history's hardest moments. Join us for the next one.